Okay, so I think we've reached 12:59, 1 o'clock on my watch, so let's get started. So welcome everyone who's joining the webinar online. My name is Kim Vlastelic, and I'm the Client Engagement Associate with the Corporate Training team here at SAIT. Jennie and I are excited to be hosting our second webinar together, Resilience for Leaders, the fourth in a series of webinars presented by SAIT. First things first, a few housekeeping items that I'd like to share. This webinar is being recorded, so we'll be sharing a link with our guests in the next week or so via email. We're expecting to run for about 30 minutes, give or take, depending on questions at the end. To ask a question, we'd ask that you just look for the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can. If we run out of time, we'll connect with you via email after the webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jennie Gibert. So Jennie has been with SAIT for the past 6 years. Many of you have hung out with her in one of our classrooms or at your office. Jennie was one of last year's award winners here at SAIT for her originality and delivery of her brand and material. When it comes to resilience, Jennie says she has learned from many different experiences and experts, building her own as she took to school groups on various expeditions as far away as Mount Everest, and with her husband Justin as they raised their 3 busy kids. Welcome, Jennie.
Thank you, and those were just a few of our resilience building moments. I'd like to return the favor and steal a moment just to introduce Kim to you as well. Kim is married to high school sweetheart Tony. They have, as you can see, 2 boys that keep them running with school, hockey, golf, and lacrosse. Kim graduated originally from the U of A and accepted a temporary summer position with an energy company that turned into a 20-year career in supply chain management. Considering her passion for learning and her dream to be a professional student, yep, she's dabbled in those engineering studies before making the switch over to business. She feels right at home at SAIT.
Thanks, Jennie. So something I learned from some of my colleagues at SAIT, let's set the intention for the session, shall we? So what can our listeners expect to take away at the end of the webinar?
That's a great question. Thank you, Kim. By the end of today, I'm confident that you will understand that resilience isn't just a quick fix or something that you can call on or build in a day. And there's at least 3, actually no, we're going to step beyond there. There's 6 or 7 concrete takeaways that you'll be able to use with your teams, your colleagues, yourself, and maybe even your families as well. To start the ball rolling, we want to post our first poll as we introduce resilience. And we're asking you perhaps to vote, put your votes forwards to the following question. See if we can get it up there. There we go. So do resilient employees create a resilient team?
So Jennie, why is resilience so sought after and needed today?
That's a great question, Kim. I've seen resilience being used as a competency. I hear the term being used pretty much daily. In the groups and the clients that I move around within, I hear constantly of how workplaces are changing all the time. For many, that infamous change curve that we used to talk about as a single piece in time has become irrelevant. And simply because we have so many change curves going on at once, it's beginning to look like a piece of artwork. We know that employees, leaders, people out there are facing less in terms of resources, more insecurity, more uncertainty regarding their roles, their jobs, and their companies. And continually, we're being asked to take on more and create more for a customer base that's simply more demanding. Add to that the constant use of words such as volatile, disruption, change, complexity. We're seeing an entire generation of workers who are surviving and definitely not thriving. When we run at this capacity, Kim, there's not much wiggle room for stress. Recovery for burnout is not just a weekend, it's years. And I know there's a small and it's growing movement that recognize that resilience isn't just the kale of the day again. Resilience is an essential choice that we need to make.
Jennie, I love that kale reference. That's awesome. So many people refer to resilience as the ability to bounce back or to cope. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes and no. Resilience is a lot deeper than a bounce back. Catherine McEwen has been one of the so the researcher, the main development, the founder, and has come up with a resilience at work tool. That's the foundation that our instructors here at SAIT are accredited in. And the definition that you can see on your screen is Catherine McEwen's definition of resilience. I like this because it has the concept of bouncing back, but it extends as well to give us mastering stress, as well as the vital ingredients of being agile with change, which we know is far more useful than being fragile with change. And I love the inclusion of proactively looking ahead to what might be coming our way.
So just to clarify, Jenny, if I'm a leader and I'm resilient, my team members are each resilient as individuals, then we should be good to go.
Yes, and no again. So individually, yes, you'll be in a good place, and that's certainly better than nothing. But what the Resilience at Work tool shows us, and the piece that I think has been missing in a lot of approaches to team effectiveness, is that team resilience is different to individual resilience. Now we're going to try and check in with the poll here for a second and see how that matches with what our listeners. And it looks to me like, yes, 78% of you are saying that resilient employees create a resilient team. What our research is showing us that it's actually different. And as you can see on the screen there, our definition of team resilience shows a different story than the individual resilience. When we use the Resilience at Work tool, we know that individual resilience is key. There's so much work that we can do for ourselves, 365 days a year. And we have a great delivery created if you're interested in just this topic of individual resilience. But when we're working with leaders and teams, that's also great delivery, by the way, we look at how to support and to develop the 7 components of team resilience. You can see them on the screen right now. Our aim is to work with teams and their leaders in how they can sustainably change behavior. The word sustainable is key in there. You can come and hang out with me for a day, or my colleagues for a day, and we can't change your behavior, not in a day. But what we can do is proactively look at areas of impact, planning, transitioning, application of the information, and we always have coaching as an option as well that will have a far greater effect.
Okay, Jenny, so what I'm hearing is the leader who has a high resilience with a team that has a high team resilience will be at an advantage. Is that right?
Yes, and there's no no in that answer. Yes is the answer. So the slide now shows you the whole story. At the bottom there, you'll see the outcomes. So if you build your team resilience, which we know now is different than individual resilience, you will be able to optimize your team's work, significantly build on your team's change adaptability and your own change leadership, improve the engagement and well-being on your team, as well as create a sustained performance.
So Jenny, I'm fascinated by this idea of team resilience. I never really thought about it like that. Can you tell me more about team resilience?
Yes, sure. Given that lots of drivers for the need for more resilience come from change, before we go there, let's start our second poll. Now, our second poll looks at what you're facing out there in terms of a level of change. So how much change are you facing on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is no change and 10 is constant change? And then I think we have a second option that will come through as to where does that change come from. So we'll let that poll run a little bit in the background. Number 10 is constantly taking a lead at the moment. And whilst we let that poll run, let's check in with some of those 7 team components. So the first one that we have is robust. And I'm going to have the definition up on the screen for you and talk just a little bit about it whilst that definition sits with you. So robust being our first one, those familiar with Monty Python's 100 meters for the directionally challenge know what it's like to be on a team that is not robust. You've got people going in every different direction. Being robust as a team is all about understanding your team's purpose, your own purpose, and the company's purpose. And what we know is that many spend thousands of dollars and hours in search of their purpose. There is an easy way in. Solid values and goals that will give us a much firmer footing and therefore the ability to be agile in our constantly changing landscape. The fear at the moment is if you're not agile, you're going to become irrelevant.
Okay, so just back to that poll, it's still running in the background, but like Jenny said, number 10 is taking the lead, which is not surprising. If you wanted to share with us, where does that change come from? We'll just ask you to pop in a few comments, if you would, in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So Jenny, values are an interesting piece. Our team spends time in client offices all over North America. We often see posters of company values on the wall. Is that what you're referring to here?
Yes, presuming that those values are walked and talked every day by you as the leader. Looking at them on a poster or posting them on a website, lovely, but not very effective. So when a team moves in these values towards their shared goals and purposes, the cohesive effect that you can achieve is phenomenal. It leads towards the second of the components, which is resourceful. I think that generally we are very tired of hearing work smarter, not harder. Being resourceful is all about recognizing what the constraints are, that they are just constraints, and working together using our strengths to answer the constraints with a we can if. In order to do this, you have to be clear on some areas, including the strengths, responsibilities, and the expectations, and how you're going to review something when it's done.
So Jenny, Brene Brown suggests clear is kind. This resonates with me, and it may also resonate with some of our listeners. Clarity is sounding like an essential in this component. Is that right?
Yes, again, yes. On so many levels. Despite our complete overuse of the word transparent, there are still an awful lot of conversations and meetings and information that is held behind closed doors. And possibly worse, I'm going to hold on to this information because that might make me indispensable notion. Sadly, none of that will get us towards a team that can be resourceful. So when we're looking in this area, we talk a lot about knowing what your role is, both social role and task group role. That's only just the beginning of that role clarity conversation. As a leader, conversations need to be continuous. You can focus them on some of these simple areas. What are your people's roles? What's your role? What are you expecting from them? What are the responsibilities that come with those roles? Do you have acceptance of those roles? It's all very well you having an idea, what's their idea? And what are the constraints that we're dealing with? Continuous conversations like this allow us to continuously improve towards that question at the bottom there. How can we be better tomorrow than we were today?
So Jenny, I see our next component is perseverance. Let's just check in with our poll to see how we're doing in this area. So it looks like, as we expected, constant change. We're at about, 34 to 50%, I would say.
And absolutely nobody facing no change anymore. So yes, Kim, perseverance is our next component. And I like this one because it leans towards your team's mindset. There is a difference in the team that frames its obstacles as learning, in a team that looks for the solution, and there's incredible power in a team that can replace blame with curiosity. You all show up to work every day with an incredible amount of energy. How you displace that energy and whether that energy takes on a positive or a negative vibe is totally within your control.
Jenny, that reminds me the last time we were here in the spring talking about the victim mindset. Sounds like there's not much room for that in this component. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Kim, working with leaders, those kind of strategies, the ones that can remove that victim mindset, are the ones that we want to hit and help with early. We know that the victim mindset is disastrous, it's contagious, and it's something that we really want to alleviate as fast as possible. Our next component is that of self-care, and I think that people really struggle with this one a lot. I come across employees regularly who truly have done a really good job on setting boundaries, and you hear terms like, I have to leave work by 4:30. When your strongest value is your family and you're turning up to work ahead of most, this just makes sense. But the sad and somewhat soul-destroying part of it is that having set this very healthy boundary, that individual then drives away feeling guilty. And let's face it, in many cases is glued to their phone whilst trying to be present with their family. It's not really the definition of a work-life balance or self-care for that matter. Leaders, you're essential in this area, essential in playing the part of a role model and really a permission giver. What that really boils down to is overt conversations have to happen regarding boundaries, and you, the leader, needs to be involved in those self-care conversations. What does self-care look like for your team? Allowing your team or a member of your team to believe that a 15-hour workday is a privilege, or answering emails at all hours is an expectation, for example, is not going to get you very far as a leader, and it's certainly not going to help your team when you start losing people, best case to turnover, worst case to stress and burnout. Life, whatever that looks like for you, is part of your vitality. You can't give if your cup's empty, and you can't fill your cup if you're grinding 24/7. So the aim here always is to encourage people to live authentically as their full version of them. As a leader, do you know what that looks like for each of your people?
So Jennie, do you think that this is a conversation we should be having as a team?
Kim, I think that's a really healthy place to start. As a leader, you want to drive for consistency, and you also want to stay within the boundaries that you have. Remember, respecting boundaries is a huge part of building trust. So a commitment to those boundaries is important. If there's no need, for example, for people to be answering emails at night when they're theoretically not on the clock or not being paid, then please don't send them an email after hours. Use the delayed send in your Outlook and let it drop the next morning. Our next one is capability. And what capability speaks to really is how are you staying relevant? How are you ensuring that you grow? It's quite simple. There's no finish line. So capability is all about how does your team deliver during the changing landscape? How you know depends on where your feedback comes from. As a leader, where does your feedback come from? Actually, when was the last time you asked for feedback? Have you asked a vendor? Have you asked a client? Have you asked a stakeholder? The list goes on and on and on. Building capability comes from learning from every situation. If you're not reviewing regularly, it's impossible to keep that culture of learning going.
Jennie, I've totally learned this the hard way in my life, in my career. Asking for feedback can be absolutely terrifying. So what's the secret?
You know, Kim, that is a question we are asked all the time. So here for everybody who's looking at the screen at the moment is the acronym ACEs of feedback. It's based heavily on Pixar's brain trust model. First off, you need to ask if who you're offering feedback to would like it. Secondly, we want to make sure that feedback is always constructive and it's about the project or the task, not the person. Please remember, constructive and criticism cannot appear in the same sentence. The next one is that when we're giving feedback, we are offering it from a place of empathy. And then finally, that the comments that are given are suggestions and not prescriptions. Remembering that I think most adults are very allergic to being told what to do. So a great place is to start with your team. Learn to ask for feedback, teach them to ask for feedback, and sort of grow in the culture of continuously giving feedback. As a leader, you could be asking, what's one thing that I currently do that you'd like me to continue doing? What can I do to make you more effective? What do I not do frequently enough that you would like to see me do more often? If you can do it as a leader with your team, you can do it with anybody outside your team as well. And as always, the golden advice there, be interested rather than interesting. Once we get this, it leads us quite nicely into our second to last component, which is connected, possibly one of my most favorite ones. There's a lot of really good information out there nowadays, and of course here at SAIT as well, on social capital, psychological safety, and creating a culture of belonging. In essence, it comes down to know your people and show them that you care about them. They're on your team because they have value. When was the last time that you celebrated that value? What do you know about your people? The component before that we talked about in capability talks about getting to candor and the importance of candor. As a leader, you can't get to candor if your people don't feel safe or seen. Building social capital does take time, but it does strengthen relationships. And as you get to that great conversation, it will lead to great ideas, growing connections, and obviously building trust and reciprocity.
So Jenny, I find this one can be rather tricky as time is always of the essence. We always have deadlines looming. So how do we find time to make relationship building a priority?
Yeah, it's a really valid question, Kim. Think back to the start of today, and we took 2 slides, probably in less than a minute, that would have allowed anybody listening in to know at least 3 key things about us. That's not a lot of time in a meeting if we took some time to develop those kind of relationship builders. I'm very sure that if we ran a poll on effectiveness of meetings or use of time in meetings, we'd get some interesting answers. We have time, it's always how we choose to spend the time that counts. Which leads us to our last component, which is alignment. This is another fun one for sure. How do you celebrate success? How do you celebrate individual success or team success? Consider your scoreboard. For most people, it's probably red and green. Hopefully the green is getting more airtime than the red, but what got you to those great green results? And what do you have in those actions and tasks that will help you impact the rest of the scoreboard? Alignment comes from conversation, acknowledgement, and knowledge.
Jenny, I can feel the collective sigh out there with our listeners. We have to concentrate on all 7 of these, as well as all the other demands that we already have going on. Is that what you're telling me here?
Yep, and deal with the change that's constantly around you as well. Yes, although step 1 is always identify what's going well. What are you doing well already? In most cases, there are a lot of great practices already happening out there, and we want to celebrate those. We want to build from the success and build from strengths, and that makes the work a whole lot easier and sometimes fun as well.
So when we were chatting the other day, we touched on quite a few ideas. Do you want to share the top 3 takeaways that might help our leaders listening today?
Okay, we can do that. Let's look at 3 that you could take away and run with today. So the first one comes from that second component, being resourceful, and it's understanding and knowing strengths. And I love this one because it's simple. If your people feel that they're using their strengths, you will find them to be more profitable, more productive, and more likely to stay with you and your company. Here's the big question though. Do you know the strengths of your employees? Okay, that means that you have to ask them what their strengths are, and you have to look at them from a strength perspective. And do you ask them to contribute from those strengths every day? Those who are familiar with Marcus Buckingham will know the scary statistic that being able to work from our strengths is the single most important driver of team performance. Yet, in his studies and research, he shows that less than 2 out of 10 employees strongly agree that they get to use their strengths at work every day. Here's the cool part. If you list what your employees' strengths are and you ask them what their strengths are, chances are those 2 lists will be really different. So now you've got double the strengths to work from. Find them out, talk about them, and discover how to leverage them moving forwards. The second one I want to offer you is about creating voice, and it comes from the third component called perseverance. So what we know is that in an average meeting of about 7 or 8 people, there's only 2 people who do the talking. And if that hippo's in the room, then that conversation is pretty much not a conversation at all.
Jenny, I'm sorry, the hippo?
So a hippo is an acronym for the highest individual paid person's opinion. Creating voice comes down to resetting your mindset. Rather than having all the answers, rather than giving a prescription or an order, the magic lies in inviting people for input. Inviting people to ask clarifying questions. And if they do, please celebrate those. It comes down to that if I feel like a function, I'm going to behave like a function. But if you can remind me that my contribution is valued and crucial, and there is nothing at stake if I speak up, then the chances are I will speak up, especially if my voice is taken productively and encouraged. So leaders, this one truly, it's on us to create a space for voice and invite voice. It's time to slow down. It's time to pay attention, which means we need to listen humbly and start to build a real conversation.
Jenny, this really makes sense to me. So how do our leaders actually do this? How do they put this in practice?
Okay, so as you can imagine, Kim, I could talk to you for a day on how to do that. But I think the fundamental basis underneath this is ask questions. And ask good questions And we need to know that the best questions are the ones that you don't already know the answer to. And that's not always easy, especially when you're on the fly. Our third one and the final one from me today is from our 7th component, which was alignment. And it's very simply about recognizing progress. There's not many leaders that know that progress is basically the deal breaker between I had a day and I had a great day. So Amabile and Kramer found out in their research that over 76% of people said that, or they named progress as an element of a great day. But what was fascinating in this study was when they went to the leaders of these people, and there were thousands of them, when the leaders were asked, only 5% of them knew that progress was such an important factor for their team members. This is really curious for leaders. When was the last time that you sought out, acknowledged individual or team progress? We're often moving so quickly that we forget to recognize progress or allow people to recognize progress. The how in this one is really easy. It's, again, we're back to go have a conversation about progress. What gets in the way? And a heads up, it might be you that gets in the way, but it's a good conversation to have. What helps with progress? What supports people making progress? And when is it worth celebrating it? We're not talking about celebrating every tick on a to-do list, but we are talking about celebrating progress that's made by individuals and their teams. The takeaway here is really simple. Please go have a conversation.
It's always the simple things that seem the most complicated, though, isn't it, really? Okay, Jenny, thank you for that. That was really great. I think we have time to check in for a few questions. We've had some really fantastic questions come in. So to our listeners, thanks for that. We really appreciate the engagement. So our first question, if we go back to the ACEs slide, Jenny.
Yes.
What is a prescription comment?
Okay, so a prescription comment, I'm just going to check what my comments and suggestions, not prescriptions. So a prescription comment, and some of you out there will smile when you hear this. If I should on you, you should do this. That's a prescription. I'm telling you. A suggestion is, what if we tackled it this way? How would you feel if we followed this process? And so when we're prescriptive, we're pointing the finger, we're telling people, we're leading them very quickly to not feel like the adult that they are when they came to work today.
Okay. So we have another question that came in. Indicators of poor self-care. What questions can our leaders, should they use to address the self-care concept? Because I know this can be quite tricky. Do you have any ideas on questions that we can start building that conversation with our team?
Yes, I think really self-care comes down to an individual piece as well. Remember that slide at the very beginning, and we had individual resilience, team resilience leads down to those outcomes. And so these two go hand in hand. If this is a new conversation for you and your team, I'd start very simply with the question, what is self-care? What does that mean to you? Where do your boundaries lie within that? You could start from the very generic, when is it acceptable to receive an email after hours? How do you feel about that as the leader? And build from there. We're talking again, we want people to be able to show up authentically as themselves. So what does that mean to them? If you have a young family, and we can both speak to this, and somebody's made a team and you want to go see them play in that team because that's part of your value, is that something that your team can embrace or not? It's about setting boundaries and then sticking to those boundaries. I've even heard some teams say, well, we replace the candy jar with the fruit bowl. There are some places that love to keep the candy bar. There are other places that have gone to fruit and yogurt. The spectrum is huge on that one.
Okay. The hippo. Someone is asking if you could go through and say, what does that mean again? Could you tell us what the hippo is?
Absolutely, and I probably should reference it too, because I'd love to tell you it's mine, but it's not. So the hippo is an acronym for highest individual paid person's opinion, and it came from Corporate Rebels, which is a website that I interact with regularly.
Brilliant. Okay. So another question. Okay. Can you recommend a workbook or paper that guides us through completing the 7 steps of resiliency with our staff?
You know, I love that question. What I want to say to you is, yes, let's come and we'll have a conversation around that, as that's the content that we're building here at SAIT. Kim is a great connection for you in terms of that. So if you just wanted a paper to look at, we are totally able to send an overview of the Resilience at Work tool out after this webinar. If you're looking at deeper work, we will be running sessions for individuals, and we'll also be running sessions with complete teams and their leaders. If you want just a white paper, Catherine McEwen is the founder, researcher behind it, and she has a white paper as well. And we'll make sure the link to that is in the materials that we send out after the webinar.
Okay, perfect, Jenny. We will do that. So just a quick time check. We're at 1:29. We'll take one more question if that's okay.
Sure.
And then we'll wrap up because our leaders are busy. So if we're looking to do training on resilience at SAIT, do we need to do both individual and team training?
Well, my obvious answer is yes, of course. No, and yes, again, that's my favorite answer today. So the stronger the resilience is, the better for everybody. You could totally do just one or just the other, and it would be a fantastic start and probably put you 5 steps ahead of where you are today. Not everybody has that capability or capacity, so you could do one or the other. And I know this, I'm smiling at you as I say it, Kim, because my good friends, Kim and her team, will be able to help you with which one is better for your team or not.
Perfect. Okay, Jenny, thank you so much. I feel like I learned so much just through a 30-minute conversation with you. So I appreciate it very much for your time. Thanks for joining us. So to our guests, if any of these topics are hitting home with you as it does with our team, stay mindful and engaged to expand your learning beyond this webinar. If your team is ready to take the next step, encourage you to be the catalyst, connect with our team, and we can help you navigate the SAIT landscape to find a solution that works. So with that, watch your inbox for the recording. As Jenny said, we'll be sharing some resources and materials after the webinar via email with our guests. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to connecting with you guys soon.
Thank you, Kim.